In this video, I'm going to tell you about 5 myths about learning English. The main goal here is to show you 5 things that people often say to students which are actually not true. Number 1, and my favorite of all, English is the most difficult language in the world. That is 100% not true. What makes a language difficult is not the language in itself, but your starting point. So if someone is learning English as a child, if you're learning English as a first language, it's just as difficult as any other language. There's been a study done by linguists, and what they researched was language development in children. What they found out was really interesting because regardless of what the language was, children always learn to speak and to write roughly around the same age. So it doesn't matter if a child is learning Hungarian, Chinese, English, or Spanish, they will all develop when they are roughly the same age. So that means no language is more difficult than the other. What makes a language more or less difficult for you to learn is actually your starting point, as I said. So if your first language is, say, Swedish and you're learning English, it's going to be much easier for you to learn to become fluent than if your first language is French. If your first language is French, it's probably going to be easier for you to learn English than if it is Chinese. If your first language is Chinese, you have to learn even an alphabet. So of course that's going to take a lot more time. What makes English more or less difficult for certain people is primarily what they speak as a first language. And also, there are other factors that play a role, like some people they have just a natural talent for languages, so they will learn faster. Other people don't. The habits that people have, how curious they are, this will make a language more or less difficult. But there's no scientific proof that any language is more difficult than the other. It's actually the opposite has actually been proven. So never believe it when people say English is the most difficult language. It's not. Second lie students sometimes get told is grammar is not important. If a teacher tells you that, they're probably not a very good teacher. You need to learn grammar to understand a language, especially if you are an adult. The problem isn't teaching or learning grammar. The problem is how you do it. So if you're learning grammar just by doing gap-filling exercises, memorizing rules, and using meta language for everything, and just kind of, you're learning verb tense names and that kind of thing, it won't be very useful. But you do need to learn grammar, and you do need to learn grammar in a practical way. If you're contextualizing everything you're learning, it is very useful, it's very important, and it's how you progress. I personally do not believe adults can learn English without this foundation, without getting exposed and getting shown the patterns of the language. I think it's actually very important, and it is a lie. Third one, only native speakers can teach pronunciation properly. That is 100% not true. And here's why. When you speak a language as a child, when you're learning how to speak, when you haven't learned how to read and write yet, your brain is like a little sponge, so it will pick up things very quickly. It doesn't have as many patterns. Your phonological map isn't completely formed, so that means it's very easy for you to see people produce language and copy what they're doing perfectly. However, as an adult, your phonological map is fully formed. You have a lot of patterns. You've been exposed to a lot of different sounds and patterns throughout your life. On top of that, the muscles of your face and your throat and your mouth, they have also been trained to function in a specific way when you're producing certain sounds. We often forget that learning a language isn't only about what you're hearing, isn't only about listening to correct forms. It's also and especially about producing those forms perfectly. I agree 100% that a native speaker will most likely be able to produce those forms perfectly. However, the problem is that the fact that you're seeing a correct form doesn't mean you will be able to copy exactly what that person is doing just from seeing what they're doing. A very common problem native speakers sometimes have with students is things are just natural to them. They don't have to learn the mechanics of the thing. So that means it might happen a lot of the time that your native speaker teacher will pronounce something correctly and you will actually hear it wrong. And this is very, very normal. What happens in our brain when we're adults is once a sound doesn't exist in your first language, your brain does something called approximation. And approximation means that if you hear a sound that doesn't exist in your first language, your brain will convert that to the closest possible sound that you have in your language. My favorite example is this country's name. So in English, this country is pronounced Sri Lanka because we don't have the combination Sri. So we don't really pronounce it like that. When English-speaking people heard that word for the first time, they couldn't really identify anything identical in their language, but they approximated it to Shri because we do have SHR in English. In Brazilian Portuguese, we say Sri Lanka, and the reason why we say Sri Lanka is because that's the closest sound we can produce. And when we see people saying that, it's very likely that that's how we're going to hear it. This happens also when you're in class. You will hear your teacher say something and you will pronounce it wrong, but you might be thinking, what am I doing wrong? I'm pronouncing it in the same way as you. The main problem is that when that happens is the fact that you haven't been exposed to the mechanical side of producing that sound. So a good pronunciation teacher is a teacher that shows you the correct form, and this can be done with a recording, for example, or with themselves as a model. But your teacher also has to show you how to do that. Your teacher also has to be trained to show you how to exercise the muscles of your face and the muscles of your mouth so that you produce that sound correctly. I'm leaving a link in the description of this video to this really nice speech lab that both teachers and students can use in class. It's excellent and it really helps you to learn how to change the way you move your muscles so that you can pronounce things perfectly. So it is not true that you need a native speaker to have excellent pronunciation. Another common lie is you will learn English in 6 months. You will learn English in a year. You will become fluent with 100 lessons. No teacher, no school, nobody will be able to say exactly how long it will take you to learn a language. There's a series of reasons for that. The main one is because learning a language doesn't depend only on how good the school is or how good the teacher is. It depends on your personal effort. It depends on your confidence to try and speak, to produce language. It depends on how gifted you are. these are things that just in an interview or just by creating a course, no one is able to tell. So if anyone tells you that you will reach a certain level after a certain amount of time, if they guarantee you that that's going to happen, it's probably a lie. That can't be true. What we do have is the CEFR, which is the Common European Framework, and they have an average number of hours that students need so that they can reach each of the CEFR levels. Now, bear in mind that it's not a matter of just completing that amount of hours, and also that that's an average. So it means for some students, let's say for example, if you want to finish the whole basic course, you need 180 hours. So for some students, some students will need 300 hours. Some students will need 95. It's an average. It's not something that will happen in the exact same way with every single student. Last but not least, my favorite one of all. Our school has created a revolutionary method that we've invented. Probably, if a school or a teacher is promising you that, it's not true. It takes years and years to develop a method. It takes years and years to combine approaches and come up with something. Most of the time, what they're doing is they're using something called communicative approach, which is a method that's quite practical. You learn how to use language in specific contexts. You associate what you're learning with the situations of everyday life. Or it's something like drilling, audiolinguism, where you repeat stuff, or you have a more grammatical approach. But I would find it personally really difficult for a student or a teacher to come up with a revolutionary method that's completely different from everything we have in the market nowadays. I think a lot of the time this is a marketing strategy, and it's not true. If you find someone who's come up with a revolutionary method that no one has ever heard of before, and that's not a combination of things that already exist, please show me. I would like to see it, because I highly doubt it. So that's it. This was a quick video on 5 lies students get told. I'm sure there's a lot more out there. If you guys know of any other ones you would like to share, please comment in this video. I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.